Anne Frank, Act 2, Scene 3. It is night, a few weeks later. Everyone is in bed. There is complete quiet. In the Van Don's room, a match flares up for a moment and then is quickly put out. Mr. Van Don, in bare feet, dressed in underwear and trousers, is dimly seen coming stealthily down the stairs and into the main room, where Mr. and Mrs. Frank and Margot are sleeping. He goes to the food safe and again lights a match. Then he cautiously opens the safe, taking out a half loaf of bread. As he closes the safe, it creaks. He stands rigid. Mrs. Frank sits up in bed. She sees him.
Otto, como gal?
German. The rest of the people wake, hurriedly getting up.
Was it las? Was it passiert?
Dussel, followed by Anne, comes from his room. As she rushes over to Mr. Van Don.
I don't know how to say. Ist straight das Essen?
Grabbing Mr. Van Don.
You, give me that.
Coming down the stairs. Putty, what is it? His hands on Van Don's neck.
You dirty thief, stealing food, you good for nothing.
Mr. Dussel, for God's sake, help me, Peter.
Peter comes over, trying, with Mr. Frank, to separate the two struggling men.
Let him go, let go.
Dussel drops Mr. Van Don, pushing him away. He shows them the end of a loaf of bread that he has taken from Van Don.
You greedy, selfish.
Margot turns on the lights. Putty, what is it? All of Mr. Frank's gentleness, her self-control is gone. She is outraged, in a frenzy of indignation.
The bread. He was stealing the bread.
It was you, and all the time we thought it was the rats.
Sir Van Don, how could you?
I'm hungry.
We're all of us are hungry. I see the children getting thinner and thinner. Your own son, Peter. I hear him moan in his sleep. He's so hungry. And you come in the night and steal food like that. Should go to them, to the children.
Going to Mr. Van Don protectively. He needs more food than the rest of us. He's used to more. He's a big man. Mr. Van Don breaks away, going over and sitting on the couch.
And you're worse than he is. You're a mother, and yet you sacrifice your child to this man, and this.
Edith.
Margot picks up the pink woolen stole, putting it over her mother's shoulders. Paying no attention, going on to Mrs. Van Don.
Don't think I haven't seen you. Always saving the choice bits for him. I've watched you day after day, and I've held my tongue, but not any longer. Not after this. Now I want him to go. I want him to get out of here.
Edith.
Get out of here.
What do you mean?
Just take just that. Take your things and get out.
You're speaking in anger. You cannot mean what you are saying.
I mean exactly that.
Mrs. Van Don takes a cover from the Frank's bed, pulling it about her.
For too long
years, we have lived here by side. We have respected each other's rights. We have managed to live in peace. Are we now going to throw it all away? I know this will never happen again. Will it, Mr. Van Don?
Jake. No.
He steals once, he'll steal again.
Mr. Van Don, holding his stomach, starts for the bathroom. Anne puts her arms around him, helping him up the step.
Edith, please let us be calm. We'll all go to our room, and afterwards we will sit down quietly and talk this out. We will find some way.
No more talk. I want them to leave.
You put us out on the streets?
There are other hiding places.
A cellar? A closet? I know. And we have no money left even to pay for that.
I'll give you money. Out of my own pocket. I'll give it gladly.
She gets her purse from a shelf and comes back with it. Mr. Frank, you told Putty you'd never forget what he'd done for you when you came to Amsterdam. You said you could never repay him, that you...
If my husband had any obligation to you, he's paid it over and over.
I've never seen you like this before. I don't know you.
I should have spoken out long ago.
You can't be nice to some people.
Turning on Dusel. There would have been plenty for all of us if you hadn't come in here.
We don't need the Nazis to destroy. Oh, that's not.
We don't need the Nazis to destroy us. We're destroying ourselves.
He sits down with his head in his hands. Mrs. Frank goes to Mrs. Van Don. Giving Mrs. Van Don some money.
Give this to me. She'll find you a place.
Mother, you're not putting Peter out. Peter hasn't done anything.
He'll stay, of course. When I say I must protect the children, I mean Peter too.
Peter rises from the steps where he has been sitting.
I'd have to go if Father goes.
Mr. Van Don comes from the bathroom. Mrs. Van Don hurries to him and takes him to the couch. Then she gets water from the sink to bathe his face.
He's no father to you, that man. He doesn't know what it is to be a father.
Starting for his room.
I wouldn't feel right. I couldn't stay.
Very well then. I'm sorry.
Rushing over to Peter.
No, Peter, no.
Peter goes into his room, closing the door after him. Anne turns back to her mother, crying.
I don't care about the food. They can have mine. I don't want it. Only don't send them away. It'll be daylight soon. They'll get caught.
Putting her arms comfortingly around Anne.
Please, Mother.
They're not going now. They'll stay here until Meek finds them a place. But one thing I insist on. He must never come down here again. He must never come to this room where any of the food is stored. We'll divide what we have. We'll share an equal share for each.
Dusel hurries over to get a sack of potatoes from the food safe. Mrs. Frank goes on to Mrs. Van Don.
You can cook it here and take it up to him.
Dusel brings the sack of potatoes back to the center table.
Oh, no. Oh, we haven't sunk so far that we're going to fight over a handful of rotten potatoes.
Dividing the potatoes into piles.
Mrs. Frank, Mr. Frank, Margot, Anne, Peter, Mrs. Van Don, Mr. Van Don, myself, Mrs. Frank.
The buzzer sounds and Meep's signal.
It's me.
Meep.
He hurries over, getting his overcoat and putting it on.
At this hour?
Is it trouble?
He starts down to unbolt the door.
I beg you, don't let her see a thing like this.
Counting without stopping.
And Peter, Mrs. Van Don, Mr. Van Don, myself.
Stop it!
Mr. Frank, Margot, Anne, Peter, Mr. Van Don, Mrs. Van Don, myself, Mrs. Frank.
You're keeping the big ones for yourself. All the big ones. Look at the size of that and that. Dussel continues on with his dividing. Peter, with his shirt and trousers on, comes from his room.
Stop it! Stop it!
We hear Meep's excited voice speaking to Mr. Frank below. Gabe.
Oh. Mr. Frank, the most wonderful news. The invasion has begun.
Go on, tell them, tell them.
Meep comes running up the steps ahead of Mr. Frank. She has a man's raincoat on over her night clothes and a bunch of orange-colored flowers in her hand.
Did you hear that, everybody? Did you hear what I said? The invasion has begun. The invasion.
They all stare at Meep, unable to grasp what she is telling them. Peter is the first to recover his wits.
Where?
When, Meep?
It began early this morning.
As she talks on, the realization of what she has said begins to dawn on them. Everyone goes crazy. A wild demonstration takes place. Mrs. Frank hugs Mr. Van Don.
Oh, Mr. Van Don, did you hear that?
Dussel embraces Mrs. Van Don. Peter grabs a frying pan and parades around the room, beating on it, singing the Dutch national anthem. Anne and Margot follow him, singing, weaving in and out among the excited grown-ups. Margot breaks away to take the flowers from Meep and distribute them to everyone. While this pandemonium is going on, Mrs. Frank tries to make herself heard above the excitement.
How do you know?
The radio. The BBC. They said they landed in the coast of Normandy.
The British?
British, American, French, Dutch, Poles, Norwegians, all of them. More than 4,000 ships. Churchill spoke and General Asian shower. Say they call it.
Thank gosh, it comes.
At last. Gabe.
Yes. I'm going to tell Mr. Crawler this will be better than any blood transfusion.
What part of Normandy did they land in? Did they say?
Normandy. That's all I know. I'll be up the minute I hear some more.
She goes hurriedly out.
What did I tell you? What did I tell you?
Mrs. Frank indicates that she has forgotten to bolt the door after Meep. He hurries down the steps. Mr. Van Don, sitting on the couch, suddenly breaks into a convulsive sob. Everyone looks at him, bewildered. Putty, what is it? What happened? Jake. Please, I'm so ashamed. Mr. Frank comes back up the steps.
Oh, for God's sake.
Don't, Putty.
It doesn't matter now.
Didn't you hear what Meep said? The invasion has come. We're going to be liberated. This is a time to celebrate.
He embraces Mrs. Frank and then hurries to the cupboard and gets the cognac and a glass.
To steal bread from children?
We've done all things that we're ashamed of.
Look at me, the way I've treated Mother. So mean and hoarded to her.
No, Anki, no.
Anne runs to her mother, putting her arms around her.
Oh, Mother, I was awful.
Not like me. No one as bad as me.
Stop it now. Let's be happy.
Giving Mr. Van Don a glass of cognac.
Ooh.
Here, snap, Jim.
Van Dawn takes the cognac. They all watch him. He gives them a feeble smile. Anne puts up her fingers in a V for victory sign. As Van Dawn gives an answering V sign, they are startled to hear a loud sob from behind them. It is Mrs. Frank, stricken with remorse. She is sitting on the other side of the room.
When I think of the terrible things I said,
Mr. Frank, Anne, and Margot hurry to her, trying to comfort her. Mr. Van Dawn brings her his glass of cognac.
No, you were right.
that I should speak that way to you, our friends, our guests.
She starts to cry again.
Stop it. You're spoiling the whole invasion.
As they are comforting her, the lights dim out, the curtain falls. Faintly at first and then with growing strength.
We are all in much better spirits these days. There's still excellent news of the invasion. The best part about it is that I have a feeling that friends are coming. Who knows? Maybe I'll be back in school by fall. Haha, the joke's on us. The warehouse man doesn't know a thing, and we are paying him all that money Wednesday, the 2nd of July, 1942. The invasion seems temporarily to be bodged down. Mr. Kriller has to have an operation, which looks bad. The gazebo have found the radio that was stolen. Mr. Dussel says that they'll trace it back to the thief, and then it's just a matter of time till they get us. Everyone is low. Even poor Pim can't raise their spirits. I have often been downcasted myself, but never in despair. I can shake off everything if I write, and that is a great question. Will I ever be able to write well? I want to so much. I want to go on living even after my death. Another birthday has gone by. I'm now 15. Already, I know what I want. I have a goal, an opinion.
As this is being said, the curtain rises on the scene. The lights dim on, and Anne's voice fades out.